Imagine that your entire future, your wealth, your status, and your very name depended on how you moved your body in a room for exactly 60 seconds. In 1872, for a Victorian debutante like Honoria, the coming out season was not a celebration. It was a high-stakes performance of social engineering. Behind the silk flowers and white lace lay a grueling regime of physical restriction. The seasonal cycle for Honoria began in the cold rooms of a Mayfair dressmaker. The preparation of the presentation gown was the first technical hurdle of her debut. This garment was governed by the Lord Chamberlain's strict regulations. It had to be white, with a specific length of train and a mandatory headdress of ostrich feathers. It was a structural apparatus of her status. Honoria regulated her physical measurements with a rigid corset. This device was not merely for aesthetics. It functioned as a tool of postural discipline. The corset restricted her lung capacity by 20%, forcing her to breathe in shallow, rapid cycles. This created the swooning aesthetic that society admired. But for her, it was a mechanical necessity to fit the bodice. Lady Cunningham, Honoria's mother, supervised the audit of the silk. She inspected every yard of the train, which reached 10 feet in length. The train was a logistical nightmare. Honoria had to learn the backward pivot, a technique for turning without entangling herself in the fabric. If the train tangled, the social failure was absolute. The dress weighed nearly 25 pounds. The resident practiced her royal curtsy for 3 hours every morning. She had to lower her body until her knees almost touched the floor, then rise in one fluid motion while managing the 10-foot train. She utilized a system of muscular memory, training her core while her legs burned with exertion. A stumble in front of the queen meant an immediate exit from the marriage market. Honoria monitored the inventory of the trousseau. This collection of dozens of dresses was required for the social events. She needed a different gown for the morning walk, the afternoon tea, and the evening ball. The logistical management of her wardrobe required a full-time lady's maid. Each dress had its own set of matching gloves and shoes. It was a massive financial investment. The atmosphere was defined by the scent of lavender and the stress of expectations. Honoria moved through the rooms with a book on her head to ensure perfect spinal alignment. She was the operator of a system designed to produce a perfect human specimen. Her internal thoughts were irrelevant. She was a vessel for ambition. Her success was measured by the rank of her future suitor. Lord Cunningham regulated the financial investment. He viewed his daughter's debut as a corporate merger. The gowns and the carriage were the overhead costs of a high-yield transaction. He managed the social intelligence, identifying which bachelors possessed the most significant titles. Honoria was the asset. Her value fluctuated based on her ability to navigate the ballroom. As the day of the drawing room approached, Honoria verified the mechanical integrity of her plumes. The ostrich feathers had to stand upright at all times. She practiced walking through narrow doorways, learning the sideways tilt to protect her headpiece. She was a technician of the aristocratic form, managing the boundaries between her body and her elaborate costume. Charlotte, a neighbor, had failed her debut the previous year. She had tripped during her presentation, and the gossip had destroyed her prospects. Honoria managed the anxiety of the fall, knowing the margin for error was non-existent. She stood before the mirror, seeing a girl replaced by a doll of silk. She was a participant in a ritual that valued appearance over the individual. As the carriage arrived for St. James's Palace, Honoria performed the final postural check. She settled into the seat, her train coiled at her feet. She managed the thermal regulation, trying to stay cool in the heavy layers. She was a manager of the small details that would determine her life. She had won the right to be seen, but the most dangerous part was just beginning. The life of a debutante was a marathon of perfection that began long before the first ball. Do you think you could maintain your posture under so much pressure? Comment on what surprised you the most, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens when the palace doors finally open. The second stage of the debutante's life in 1872 involved the high-volume commerce of the ballroom. Honoria entered the dazzling halls of a London mansion, managing the navigation of the crowd. She understood that every movement was being audited by the chaperones row. These older women sat along the walls, recording the behavior of every girl. Honoria managed her gaze regulation, ensuring she never looked too directly at a man or too long at a rival. The resident performed the application of the dance card, a small ivory tablet hung from her wrist. This card was the ledger of her social success. She managed the allocation of dances, ensuring that her card was filled with the names of eligible suitors. A blank line on the card was a visual indicator of low social value. She moved with precision, accepting invitations with a muted smile that signaled her availability without appearing desperate. This was the economy of the waltz. Lord Cunningham utilized the intelligence network of the gentlemen's clubs to vet the names on Honoria's card for stability and connections. While Honoria danced the quadrille, her father was managing the credit check. He wanted to ensure that any man pursuing his daughter was not hiding gambling debts or a declining estate. Honoria was a participant in a financial negotiation conducted through the rhythm of the music and the movement of feet. She regulated her physical endurance during the long nights. A typical ball lasted from 10 in the evening until 4 in the morning. She had to stay upright and engaged for 6 hours, despite the restriction of her corset and the weight of her gown. She managed the hydration gap, as drinking too much water was risky, given the complexity of her layers. She was an athlete of the ballroom, performing a marathon of social grace. The management of ballroom conversation followed a strict script. Honoria talked about the opera, the flowers, and the weather. She avoided controversial topics like politics or industry. She understands that her voice was a tool of aesthetic neutrality. She had to appear intelligent but not opinionated. She was a technician of the polite small talk in the ballroom. Inside the manor, Honoria's mother regulated the inventory of the suitors, reviewing the calling cards left at the door each afternoon. She managed the social access, deciding which men were allowed to visit Honoria for tea. Lady Cunningham was the gatekeeper of the parlor, filtering out the fortune hunters. Honoria had only the obedience to accept her mother's choices. Honoria supervised the vigilance of the fan, using the silk and lace device to communicate coded messages to her suitors. A specific flick of the wrist indicated interest, while a closed fan signaled a dismissal. She was a master of the silent language, managing the boundaries of her interactions without speaking a word. The fan was a social shield and a communication tool. The atmosphere of the ball was defined by the smell of perfume and the heat of thousands of wax candles. Honoria moved through the pungent vapor, managing the thermal stress of her core. She was the operator of a private system designed to maintain the appearance of freshness in a stifling environment. Her bathing ritual before the ball was her primary defense. As the night drew to a close, Honoria performed the final social audit. She reviewed her dance card and the names of the men she had met. She managed the thermal stability of her body, wrapping herself in a heavy cloak for the carriage ride home. She knew that the luxury of the ball was a grueling labor. She stood in the quiet dawn, the music still ringing in her ears. The third phase of the Victorian season focused on the management of the afternoon promenade. For a debutante in 1872, the park was a significant technical challenge. Honoria entered Hyde Park at the mandatory hour, managing the interlacing of the social circles. She understood that the park was a stage for the public audit, where crowds viewed the elite. The resident supervised the display of the carriage, ensuring that the horses were perfectly groomed and the footmen were in pristine livery. This was a method of visual dominance, signaling her family's rank to the world. She managed the nod and the smile, a specific set of gestures used to acknowledge friends without stopping the carriage. Every cup of tea was a transaction. Lord Cunningham regulated the club affiliations of the manor, where the men discussed the rumors of the park. He had access to social secrets that could make or break a debutante's reputation. His image management was a display of power, while Honoria's was a requirement of virtue. He controlled the narrative. She inhabited it. She was a manager of internalized shame. Honoria monitored the tension of the conversation, ensuring she never gossiped about the wrong families. She realized that her reputation was a fragile asset. One social misstep could end her season. She managed the information flow, learning which families were in favor and which were declining. Her social intelligence was a biological indicator of her family's stability. The management of morning calls involved the use of engraved cards. Honoria used her card to indicate she was at home to visitors. She understood that the card was a social currency. This was a formal interaction that she performed with precision. She was a curator of the parlor rituals, using the service of tea to manage the hierarchy of her guests. Inside the manor, Honoria's mother regulated the services of the milliner, where hats and bonnets were styled according to the latest fashions. Lady Cunningham's management was about social superiority, while Honoria's was about functional elegance. She wore her hat at the mandatory angle, protecting her skin from the sun. She was a manager of skin clarity. Honoria performed a reputational inspection of her friends before inviting them to her home. She used her knowledge of the season's scandals to protect her social purity. She understood that even a perfect debutante could be ruined by the wrong associations. Her knowledge was an applied practice of social control. She was a technician of the elite environment. The air in the parlor grew heavy with the scent of tea and expensive floral arrangements. Honoria moved through the damp atmosphere of the London fog, managing the postural recovery by resting briefly between calls. She was the conductor of a slow maintenance of her body's energy. Her corset acted as a thermal trap, holding the heat against her skin during her afternoon calls. Lord Cunningham's secretary visited Honoria to update the social ledger, noting the names of the families she had visited. He managed the bureaucracy of the season, ensuring the Lord received a full report. Honoria accepted the oversight, regulating the transaction of the elite. She sold her privacy for the security of her future marriage. She was a participant in duty. As the night grew dark, Honoria secured her hair in a tight coil for bed. She managed the mechanical integrity of her braids, ensuring her hair remained smooth for the hairdresser. She knew the process was a cycle that would repeat every day for 3 months. She stood in the quiet room, blowing out the candle. She was a master of the small social lives she managed. The final phase of the daily ritual in 1872 involved the restoration of the debutante's psychological core. Honoria moved from the public ballroom to the privacy of her bedroom, managing the deconstruction of the persona. She understood that the removal of the gown and the corset was a physical release. She wrapped herself in a soft silk dressing gown for comfort. The resident regulated the intellectual intake needed to calm her mind. She read a few pages of poetry or a safe novel. She understood that internal peace was as important as external poise. The reading provided the mental fuel her system required to recover from the social exhaustion. She managed the sequence of the recovery, ensuring she was alone before she relaxed. Lord Cunningham managed the architectural security of the manor, where thick walls and iron gates kept the lower classes away. He utilized gas lighting to ensure the halls were never dark. His environmental management was a structural advantage, while Honoria's was a psychological struggle. He relied on the walls. She relied on her own discipline in the quiet night. Honoria managed the vigilance of the journal, writing her private observations in a locked book. She understood that the journal was a space for the truth. She managed the zonal integrity of her mind, keeping her true feelings hidden. In a world of total public auditing, her journal was a constant battle against the encroachment of the social mask she wore by day. The management of nervous energy involved the use of smelling salts and lavender water. Honoria used these substances to prevent the hysteria that society feared in young women. She understood that a calm body was essential for her success. This was a method of biological modification, making her nervous system hospitable to the demands of the season's pressure. Inside the manor, Honoria's mother regulated the medical consultations, where doctors were called to ensure the debutantes remained healthy enough to finish the season. Lady Cunningham's health management was a system of maintenance, while Honoria's was a protocol of survival. The mother enjoyed the results. The daughter fought for the strength to continue the vigil. The resident managed the evaporation of the persona, sitting in the quiet of the night. She felt the tension leaving her muscles, a process that indicated her body was finally at rest. She was a manager of the internal climate within her room, adjusting her pillows to capture comfort. Her fingers were the judges of the fabric's dryness as she prepared for sleep. The bedroom smelled of violet powder and expensive soap. Honoria climbed into the high bed, managing the manual elevation of her body into the layers of linen. She was the curator of her own rest. She looked at the empty gown on the chair and the cold fireplace. She realized that the effort of the day had consumed her spirit. This was the cost of the perfect life. Lord Cunningham's valet conducted the final inspection of the manor, ensuring the lights were extinguished and the doors were locked for the night. He managed the security of the wealth. Honoria watched the light under her door disappear. She managed the stoicism of the debutante, knowing the father's rules governed her sleep. She buried her true self in sleep. As the moon rose over London, Honoria settled into the pillows. She managed the conservation of the identity, pulling the linen sheet tight around her neck. She knew that the cycle of dressing and performing would begin again at 8 in the morning. She sat in the cooling room, a manager of the social and the psychological, having secured the comfort of her status. Maintaining a perfect image was the only way to survive. But what was the cost to her soul? Comment if you believe Honoria's sacrifice was worth the reward. And subscribe to unmask the secrets that high society tried so hard to hide. The conclusion of the Victorian season in 1872 required the management of the marriage proposal. Honoria stood in the sunlit morning room, waiting for the arrival of the Earl of Ashbourne. She managed the final negotiation, understanding that her body and her name were now assets for transfer. She understood that the engagement was the commercial success of her season. The resident regulated the sanitization of the agreement, reviewing the terms of her dowry and her future settlement. She understood that a vague contract would harbor future conflict. She managed the acceptance of the transfer, placing her hand in the Earl's to ensure the deal was sealed. The maintenance of her family's position was as important as her own comfort. Lord Cunningham managed the systemic merger of the two estates, where lawyers carried out the transfer of lands and funds. He utilized marriage settlements to protect the family's wealth. His contract management was a legal engineering project, while Honoria's was a personal submission. He had the power to dictate the terms. She had the necessity to accept duty. The debutante managed the vigilance of the future, ensuring the announcement was sent to the newspapers with the correct wording. She understood that public perception was the source of her future power. She managed the grading of her status, selecting a wedding date that maximized the social impact. She was a strategic manager of her own life and her reputation. The management of post-season rituals involved the preparation of the wedding dress. Honoria used the finest Brussels lace and white satin. She understood that visual integrity was essential for her final performance as a debutante. A stained reputation was a site for social infection. She was a practitioner of preventative social medicine, protecting the Cunningham name. Inside the manor, Honoria's mother regulated the bridal trousseau, where dozens of new gowns and sets of linens were prepared for Honoria's new home. Lady Cunningham's gift management was about legacy and dominance, while Honoria's was about transition and function. The mother groomed for the eyes of the peerage, the daughter prepared for the demands of the estate. The resident managed the maintenance of the social standing, writing thank you notes to the hostesses. She understood that a single splash of rudeness would ruin the work of the previous months. She managed the integrity of the alliance, protecting the central source of status from her own ego. She was a curator of the formal and the correct in her home. The manor was a space of heavy silence and the scent of expensive lilies. Honoria sat on her bed, performing the final review of the season, checking her social standing for any remaining flaws. She was the auditor of the perfect. She felt the success of her labor in the weight of the diamond ring. She had navigated the logistics and emerged with her future marriage intact. Lord Cunningham made his final rounds of the parlor, his footsteps echoing in the quiet manor. He managed the social order of the family, ensuring the Cunningham house remained a powerful place. Honoria watched his shadow pass her wall. She managed the silence of the asset, knowing that her private victory was invisible to her father. She settled into her linen bed. As the city of London slept, the announcement Honoria had sent seeped into the morning papers. She managed the transition to the wife, her spirit recovering from the exertion of the season. She knew that tomorrow would bring the labor of the wedding. The cycle of the perfect would begin again, but for now, she was at rest. She was a debutante of 1872, finally finished.